The peacock cost $2 at the Pratt County spring livestock sale, which was what he cost because nobody at the sale knew what to do with a white peacock, and the man selling him had spent the morning explaining and was done explaining. He was white. Not cream, not pale, white. The pure white of a bird whose plumage carried no color pigment. 2 years old, which meant he had not yet grown the full tail display that would have made his value immediately apparent to anyone who knew the breed. He moved around the temporary pen with the unhurried dignity of a bird that has assessed its surroundings and found them adequate but unimpressive. His eyes were blue. This was the detail that told Nola what she was looking at. An albino bird had pink or red eyes from the absence of melanin in the iris. This bird's eyes were a clear, vivid blue, the natural eye color of the Indian blue peafowl, unchanged by the leucistic mutation that had removed the color from every feather. Leucism and albinism were different things. Nobody at the Pratt County sale was in a position to care about the difference. Nola was. She had read about leucistic peacocks in the natural history book her father had kept on the shelf beside the seed catalogs. She had read the entire book twice, in the winter months when the farm did not require her outside, because reading was how she prepared for things she had not yet encountered. The chapter on peafowl genetic variants had been one of 14 chapters she had memorized without intending to memorize, the way you memorize things that strike you as significant before you know why. She had not expected to see one at the Pratt County sale in April. She stood at the rail for 8 minutes and used them well. She looked at the frame, the bone structure of the legs, the width of the chest, the way the neck carried the head. She looked at the condition of the body plumage that was already present, which was clean and dense and showed the quality of genetics that had been given the right conditions for the first 2 years of the bird's life. She looked at the feet. A bird's feet told you a great deal about its management history. These were clean and correct. She raised her hand at $2. Nobody else moved. The auctioneer looked at the room once more with the expression of a man who has been trying to do his job and is going to accept what the room is offering, and gave the bird to her. The man who had been selling him shook her hand with the expression of someone transferring a problem he was glad to no longer own. She loaded the peacock in the wood and wire crate she had brought to the sale on the principle that useful opportunities arrived when you were prepared for them and not when you weren't, and she drove home on the county road with a $2 bird in the truck bed and a clear idea of what she was going to do with him. Cass Alderman was at the south fence when she pulled into the yard. He had been at the south fence on Thursdays since May. The shared gate at the south property line had needed rehinging in May, and he had come to do it and had continued appearing each Thursday with the pale green eyes and the expression of a man attending to something that had ceased to need attending. He looked at the crate in the truck bed. He looked at the white bird visible through the wire. He looked at Nola. "Peacock," she said. "White one. Leucistic, not albino. Look at the eyes." He came closer and looked at the eyes, the vivid blue against the white plumage. He was quiet for a moment with the quality she was beginning to recognize, not absence of thought, but arrival of it. "What does leucistic mean for a peacock?" he said. She told him. The mutation, the eye color that confirmed it, the tail development that would begin in his 3rd year, the feathers that would fall naturally every August and regrow every fall without the bird being harmed. The millinery trade, the decorative arts market, the specific value of white peacock feathers versus standard blue-green. She told him she had been writing to buyers since March, before she bought the bird, because she had wanted to know the market before she decided whether $2 was worth it. He looked at her. "You wrote to buyers before you bought them." "I found a listing in a trade catalog at the library in Pratt in February," she said. "I wrote 3 letters. 2 responded. I wanted to know what I was looking at if I ever saw one." He looked at the crate. At the bird in the crate looking back at them with the blue eyes and the composed patience of an animal that has formed no conclusions yet about this new situation. How long does the train take? Full development at 3 years. He's 2 now. She picked up the crate. Next spring. He helped her carry it to the barn. The county formed its opinion by Thursday, which was how long it took the word to get from the sale grounds to the co-op to the feed store to the kitchen tables of Pratt County. The opinions were various, but arrived at the same conclusion from different directions. Foolish, eccentric, a waste of $2 and an afternoon, a city idea about farming that would not survive contact with Kansas. Several people noted that peacocks were not farm animals. One woman at the co-op said she supposed Nola was doing her best with the property, which was the county's specific phrasing for, "She is going to fail, but I will be kind about it." Nobody asked about the eyes. Cass reported this at the fence on Thursday with the neutral expression he wore when he was delivering information without editorial addition. "What did you say?" she asked. "That I'd seen the bird and he looked healthy and you generally knew what you were doing?" She looked at him. In 16 months at the Crane farm, she had received 4 complete sentences of support from Pratt County residents. This was one of them. "That was more than most people said." "It was accurate," he said simply, and went back to the gate. She built the roosting structure against the east barn wall that weekend, 8 feet high, open-sided but covered, positioned where the afternoon shade fell correctly, because peacocks roosted high, and a bird that could not roost at the right height became stressed, and stress in a display bird was the enemy of the entire operation. She fed him the right combination of standard poultry grain and cracked corn and dried insects she had ordered specifically from the feed supply in Liberal, because the Pratt Co-op did not stock what the breed required, and she was not going to substitute. She gave him the yard space the breed needed. She watched him before she touched him, recorded what she observed, and waited. By July, he allowed her within 6 feet without moving away. By August, he came to the feed dish while she was still holding it. This was not a small thing. Peacocks were not social animals in the way that chickens were social, and a bird that accepted your proximity at the feed dish had made a considered decision about you. Nola noted it in the notebook with the same economy she applied to all entries. August 14th. Came to dish while held. Decision made. Saul, she had named him in May, short for solus, Latin for alone, because he was the only one of his kind in Pratt County and carried himself accordingly, settled into the farm with the unhurried thoroughness of a bird that has decided a place is adequate and intends to make it his. He learned the roosting structure and the yard perimeter and the daily rhythms of the farm. He learned Nola's footstep on the path from the house. He learned by October that Cass appeared at the south fence on Thursdays and that this was not a threat, which was a more nuanced assessment than most of the county had managed. The train came in the following spring. She had read about it and had not fully imagined it. The upper tail coverts, the technical name for what people called the peacock's tail, emerged from the base in February as barely visible quill tips that she checked each morning before the other farm work. By March, they were 6 inches, and the structure of the individual feather shafts was already showing the quality she had been hoping for. Dense, straight, the barbs extending evenly from the central shaft in the way of healthy genetics. By April, they were 2 feet, and the ocelli were beginning to develop at the tips, the distinctive eye-shaped markings that were the defining feature of the peacock's display, and in Saul's case, white on white, the marking visible only in the subtle iridescence of the feather's surface, which shifted color as the light angle changed. By May, they were 4 feet, and she was measuring them weekly and recording the numbers in the notebook beside the buyer correspondence. By June, they were 5.5 feet, and Saul began displaying. She had known from the natural history book what a peacock in display looked like. Knowing it from text was a different thing from standing in her yard on a June morning with 5.5 feet of white train open in a perfect arc above her. 163 individual feathers, each catching the early light at a slightly different angle, the white-on-white ocelli shifting from white to silver to the faintest iridescent blue-green as the display moved. It was not the bold coloration of a standard peacock. It was quieter, more extraordinary for its quietness, the kind of beauty that required you to stop and actually look before you could see it, rather than the kind that announced itself. She stood in the yard for a long time, and then went inside and got the camera. She photographed him for 40 minutes. Cass arrived at the south fence at his usual Thursday time and stopped at the gate line and stood there without saying anything for a period that was notably longer than his ordinary silences. "Yes," she said. "Yes," he agreed. They stood at the fence together until Saul decided the display was concluded and folded the train back with the unhurried competence he brought to all transitions. She sent the photographs to the Kansas City buyer in July with the feather measurements she had been taking since February. He wrote back within the week and said he was coming in August as planned and bringing a colleague who handled the New York millinery accounts. The molt began on the 3rd of August. She had been checking the yard every morning since late July, which was how she found the first feather on the 4th, lying in the morning dew at the east corner of the yard, 5.5 feet of white feather with the iridescent ocellus at the tip, intact and undamaged, the way a naturally shed feather fell when the bird was healthy and the molt was occurring correctly. She crouched in the morning dew and looked at it before she picked it up. The specific luster of it in the August morning light. The feather was not flat white, it had depth, a quality of light within the fiber structure that she had not fully expected even from the display she had been watching all summer. The ocellus at the tip shifted as a cloud moved across the sun and back. White, then silver, then the faintest hint of iridescent blue-green at the center, then white again. A feather that had not committed to a single color and was more beautiful for the not committing. She picked it up carefully with both hands, the way you picked up something that mattered, and carried it inside and laid it on the kitchen table in the morning light, and looked at it for longer than she usually allowed herself to look at things that were not immediately productive. Then she put it in the clean cardboard tube she had prepared for storage, rigid, lined, sealed, and went back to the yard for the rest of the morning check. Over the following 19 days, Saul shed 163 train feathers. She collected each one from the ground in the mornings, checked it carefully for damage from ground contact or from the molt process itself, and stored the undamaged ones in the tubes. Of the 163, 147 were undamaged and suitable for the primary market. The remaining 16 she set aside for the secondary craft market she had already identified through the buyer correspondence, because nothing useful was wasted, which was a principle she had learned from the farm and applied to everything. The Kansas City buyer arrived on the 22nd of August with his colleague, who wore a hat that suggested New York in the way that certain hats did. They stood in Nola's front room with the 147 feathers laid out on clean canvas on the table and were quiet for a period that told her everything she needed to know about where the negotiation was going. The colleague picked up the first feather and held it at different angles and said nothing for 30 seconds, which was, in Nola's experience of the buyer correspondence, the equivalent of a long paragraph. Cass was at the porch rail when they went inside. He did not come in. This was her operation and her negotiation, and he understood both without being told, but he was present in the way he had been present at this fence since May, which was close enough to be there without being in the way. The Kansas City buyer made his offer. His colleague made a separate offer for a standing contract on next year's molt, with a per-feather rate above the spot price because the New York millinery market paid differently than the Kansas City market, and because the colleague said, with the professional directness of someone who knew the difference, that he had not, in 12 years of buying, handled a white peacock feather with ocelli of this development and iridescent quality. She negotiated both offers. She had been calculating the positions since July, the floor, the ceiling, the specific leverage points that the scarcity of leucistic peacock feathers in the current market produced. She moved between the floor and the ceiling with the patience of a woman who understood that patience in a negotiation was the same skill as patience in a drought year, and that the skill was the same because both required you to have prepared correctly and to trust the preparation. When both buyers left, she stood on the porch with the signed purchase orders and the contract proposal and the numbers she had written in the notebook. Cass came from the fence. She showed him the numbers. He looked at them for a long time, longer than he usually looked at things, which was itself information about the numbers. "Per feather," he said. "Per feather," she said. "New York millinery pricing for leucistic peacock train feathers with full ocelli development. And the standing contract covers 5 years with renewal options." She looked at Saul in the yard. He had completed the molt and was wearing the shorter secondary plumage that filled the time between the shedding and the new train's growth, which he wore with appropriate dignity. Saul is 2 years into his adult train. He will molt every August for the next 15 to 18 years if correctly managed. He was quiet for a moment, with the specific quality of a man who has received information he needs to sit with. "Nola," he said. She waited. "The gate at the south property line," he said, "which I rehinged in May and which has been fine since May." "Yes," she said. "I'd like to stop pretending the gate is the reason I come on Thursdays." She looked at the yard, at Saul, at the purchase orders in her hand, at the farm that had started with a wheat operation and 15 months of a loan and a natural history book on the shelf, and had become, through a $2 bid and a buyer correspondence begun in March, and 19 days of August feather collecting, and 2 men who drove from Kansas City to stand in her front room and confirm what she had already known, something she had not planned and had been prepared for anyway. "Come to supper on Sunday," she said. "Not about the contract, not about Saul, just supper." "Sunday," he said. 5 o'clock, front door. He was there at 4:50, which she counted. He kept coming on Sundays and eventually on other days, and the farm acquired the quality of a farm with 2 people on it, not doubled but multiplied, the specific multiplication of a shared operation where each person knows different things, and the knowing is compatible, and the combination produces outcomes neither person would have arrived at alone. Saul molted every August. Each year the feathers were better, more fully developed ocelli, the iridescent quality deepening as the bird matured into the full expression of his genetics. The New York contract renewed at the end of 5 years, and again at the end of the second 5. A Chicago decorative arts supplier came in the 3rd year, wanting the smaller shoulder feathers she had been selling to the secondary craft market. She renegotiated and got a better rate, because she was better at negotiating in the 3rd year than she had been in the 1st. Which was one of the things that happened when you did something carefully for long enough. By the 4th year, Saul had 2 leucistic peahens because paired peahens stabilized his territorial behavior considerably, and because leucistic pairs produced leucistic offspring at a higher frequency than mixed pairs. The first clutch of chicks included 3 leucistic birds. On a May morning in the 4th year, she was at the kitchen table with the coffee and the morning record, Cass across from her reviewing the August projections, when Saul began displaying in the yard. They both looked up. 5-foot train fully open, 163 feathers catching the May morning at slightly different angles, the ocelli shifting white to silver to the faintest blue as the light moved. The 2 peahens watched from the roosting structure. The 3 leucistic chicks were at the far end of the yard doing what young birds did. 20 years, Cass said. 15 more, at minimum. She looked at the notebook on the table. The April 1934 entry. $2, leucistic male, 2 years, train at 3. If genetics hold, 20 years of harvest. Buyer correspondence begun March. She looked at Cass across the table with the coffee and the morning and the display outside the window. $2, she said. At the Pratt County sale in April 1934. Nobody else bid. Saul closed the display and walked to the water basin with the unhurried dignity he brought to all transitions. "You saw it," Cass said, "before it was there to see." "I read about leucistic peacocks in February," she said. And then I went to the sale in April, and he was there. She looked up. Some things you read about, and then you recognize when you see them. He looked at her with the pale green eyes that had been looking at things on this farm since May of 1934, and that had, she had come to understand, been doing the same thing she did when she looked at a bird through a sail pin slat and registered the eye color before anything else. Yes, he said, they are. The May morning was what it was, 15 more years of harvest. And on a Sunday at 5 o'clock, or 4:50 if Cass was being accurate about it, which he always was, supper. She had written in the notebook on the day she bought Saul at the Pratt County sale, before she had even driven home. $2, leucistic male, 2 years, train at 3, if genetics hold, 20 years of harvest, buyer correspondence begun March. 20 years was a long time to have been right about something before it was visible. Most of the county's assessment of the farm decision came within the first season, from what you could see from the county road at 30 miles an hour. A peacock without his train was a white bird of uncertain purpose. A peacock with his train was something else entirely, and it took 3 years for the train to arrive, which was 2.5 years longer than most county opinions were willing to wait. Nola had been willing to wait because she had read the chapter in February and understood what she was waiting for. Cass had been willing to wait because he had been at her fence since May and had seen enough by June to understand that Nola Crane's waiting was the considered kind, not the hoping kind, that she had done the math before she committed, and that the math was sound. This was something she had not known about him when he first appeared at the fence with the gate in May. She had learned it incrementally. The way you learn things about a person who showed up consistently and said what he meant and did not say what he didn't mean. By October, she knew it completely. By the following spring, when the train began its growth and Cass appeared at the fence each Thursday and measured the week's progress in the same notebook she kept for the farm records, she had stopped thinking of the fence as the property line between two farms and had started thinking of it as the property line between two people who were, in the specific daily accumulation of Thursday mornings and shared numbers and the occasional supper that had begun in December and continued without either of them deciding it was going to continue, becoming something that required a word she had not yet used. The word arrived in the 4th year, the May morning with the display and the coffee and the leucistic chicks at the east end of the yard and Cass across the table with the feather projections and 15 more years ahead of them both. She did not say it then. She did not need to. The word was already present in the farm, in the shared operation and the Sunday suppers, and the way he arrived at 4:50 when she said 5 o'clock, and she had stopped mentioning the gap because the gap was itself a form of language she had learned to read. 20 years of harvest. 15 more. And the November morning when she would find the first feather of the current season in the east corner of the yard and carry it inside with both hands and set it on the kitchen table, and two people would look at it together, the same feather, the same morning, from opposite sides of the same table, was still coming, and would be ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, which was the quality of most things that mattered. She had read about leucistic peacocks in February. She had recognized one in April. Some things you read about and then you recognize when you see them. The same was true of most of the important things.